It is early on a Sunday morning in Jerusalem, and something has already happened that the Roman soldiers guarding a garden tomb have no way to explain. The sky is still gray. Mary of Magdala is on the road with spices in her hands, moving with the specific kind of grief that makes you get up before dawn and do something practical, because doing something is better than lying still in the dark and being crushed by what you know is true. She was there when they carried him to this place. She was there when they rolled the stone across the entrance. She has had 36 hours to absorb the weight of that moment, and she has not absorbed it yet. When she arrives, the stone is already moved. What the soldiers reported that morning, what they were paid to explain away, is the final exhibit in the longest legal case ever built. An empty space where a body should be. Burial cloths lying exactly where a body should be, as though a man had simply passed through them. No break-in, no forced entry, no explanation that does not require you to reconsider everything you thought you understood about what is possible. This is where we are going to end, but you cannot understand the final exhibit without starting at the beginning, and the beginning is not in this garden. The beginning is 2.5 years earlier at a wedding in a small town called Cana, where a celebration was about to fail and where 6 stone water jars were about to become the first piece of evidence in this investigation. But before we go back to that garden, before we look at what those soldiers could not explain, I need to tell you about a single word. Because what the text actually says, not the English translation, but the word John chose in the original language, changes the entire frame of every miracle account that follows. And once you see it, you will not be able to read these stories the same way again. In the Gospel of John, the gospel that records the most individual acts of power by Jesus, the word John uses for what we translate as miracles is not the Greek word for wonder. The Greek word for wonder is teres. John does not use it to describe what Jesus did. It is not the word for mighty work, which is dynamis, the word the other 3 Gospels prefer. The word John returns to, deliberately and consistently, is sēmeia, signs. A sign is not a performance designed to impress you. A sign is evidence pointing at something beyond itself. When you see a sign on a road, you do not stop and admire it. You read it. You let it tell you where you are. You follow where it points. And near the end of his gospel, John tells you exactly why he chose the specific signs he chose to record. He writes, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. This is not a highlight reel. This is a legal brief. John is building a case, sign by sign, exhibit by exhibit, toward a single verdict, and he tells you the verdict up front so you can spend the rest of the gospel watching how the evidence was gathered. The question John is building toward is not, do you have enough faith to receive something from God? The question John is building toward is, given what you have seen, who do you say this man is? That is a different question entirely, and it changes everything about how you read what is coming. Cana of Galilee, a wedding feast, sometime around 27 or 28 AD. In 1st century Jewish culture, a wedding celebration could last 7 days. Tradition held that to run out of wine before the feast was over was not an inconvenience. It was a social catastrophe, the kind that would be remembered in a small Galilean town for a generation. The shame would follow a family for years. Mary, the mother of Jesus, finds her son in the crowd and says 3 words. They have no wine. Notice what she does not say. She does not ask for a miracle. She does not say, show these people who you are. She simply reports a problem, and then she turns to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you. Something in the way she says it suggests she believes something is possible that she cannot fully articulate, but she is not issuing a theological declaration. She is reporting a shortage and getting out of the way. Jesus' response is strange in the original language. He calls her by the word gynae, woman, which is formal, not dismissive, but notably not the word for mother. It is as though he is gently marking a threshold between the life she has known with him and what he is about to become to the world. A line is being crossed, quietly, in the middle of a catering crisis. He tells the servants to fill 6 stone water jars with water. The jars are large, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. They fill them to the brim. Then he tells them to draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. The master of the feast tastes wine, not adequate wine, good wine. Wine so unexpectedly good that he calls the groom over and says, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when the guests have had their fill, then the lesser wine. But you have kept the good wine until last." The groom receives the compliment. The master of the feast does not know the source. The guests do not know. Not a miracle performed for the crowd, not a power display for the religious authorities, not even a gesture meant to prove a point to anyone watching, but a sign offered first to servants who had no theological framework for what they were witnessing, tasted first by a man who had no idea what he was tasting, and recorded by John for one specific reason. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Sign first, belief after. Note that order carefully, because you are going to see it again. And note the water jars. They were made of stone. We will come back to stone before this investigation is over. A few days into his ministry, a royal official approaches Jesus in Cana. The man has rank. He has access to power. He has resources. And none of it matters right now because his son is dying in Capernaum 25 miles away. He walks 25 miles to find a man he has never met and asks him to heal a child the man has never seen. He does not have a theological argument ready. He has a desperate father's case and nothing else. Jesus says, "Go, your son will live." The official believes the word that Jesus spoke, enough to turn and make the long walk home without confirmation. And the next morning, when his servants meet him on the road with news that the fever broke at the exact hour Jesus spoke those words, John records that he himself believed and all his household. This is the second sign, and the pattern is already visible. The deeper belief, the household belief, came when the evidence confirmed what had been promised. The man arrived with enough hope to walk 25 miles. He left with enough evidence to baptize his entire household. Sign first, belief after. Here is what the evidence shows so far. In 2 consecutive signs, faith was not the condition for the miracle. It was the result. John is not showing you what faith produces. He is showing you what evidence produces. He is building a case. But here is where the case becomes genuinely uncomfortable, and I want you to stay with it because this is the part most Bible content skips over, and this is the part you may need most. By the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, a pool surrounded by 5 colonnades, there is a crowd of sick people, blind people, paralyzed people, people whose conditions have no name in any century and no treatment in this one. Archaeologists excavating beneath a Byzantine church near Jerusalem's Sheep Gate in the 19th century found it. The 5-columned structure, the 2 pools, exactly as John described it, in a city that had been destroyed and rebuilt 3 times since the 1st century. You can go and stand there today, look at what is left of the stonework, and understand that John was not writing mythology. He was writing geography. Among the people at that pool is a man who has been ill for 38 years. 38 years? That is longer than most people in the ancient world survived past childhood. He was not waiting for a miracle anymore. He had been managing a condition for nearly 4 decades, close enough to touch the water, unable to reach it alone. He had given up expecting the thing he kept sitting beside. Jesus walks into this scene, and the detail that most readings move past too quickly is this: he does not heal everyone at the pool. He walks past people. He stops at one. He never asked what they believed first. That sentence is the second piece of evidence I want you to carry through this investigation. He walks past people who may have had more faith, more hope, more years left to live than this man. He stops at one, and when he stops, his first question is not, "Do you believe in me?" His first question is, "Do you want to be healed?" The man's answer is not, "I believe." The man's answer is, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." He answers a question about his desire with a logistical complaint. He is not making a faith declaration. He is filing a grievance about the infrastructure of healing in his time. Jesus heals him anyway. And then John records something that stays in the mind long after you finish reading it. When the religious authorities question the man later about who told him to carry his mat on the Sabbath, the text says the man did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn into the crowd. He was healed by a man whose name he did not know. No prayer before, no gratitude recorded. When Jesus finds him afterward in the temple and the man finally learns who healed him, he goes and reports it to the authorities, a report that immediately places Jesus in greater danger. This man did nothing correctly. He had no faith to offer. He showed no recognition. He gave information to people who were building a case against the man who healed him. And Jesus chose him out of every person at that pool. Here is what the text actually says about what this sign proves. It does not prove that God heals those who believe enough. It proves that God acts according to his own purposes, in his own timing, by his own choosing, and that the people he stops beside are sometimes the last ones you would have picked. That is not a smaller claim. That is an immeasurably larger claim. Because if it is true, it means the question was never whether your faith was sufficient. It means the question is whether, when Jesus tells you to pick up your mat and walk, you are willing to try. Pay attention to the next case, because it answers a question you may have been sitting with since we started. A man is sitting near the temple in Jerusalem. He has been blind since birth, and in first-century Jewish theology, this immediately raised the question of cause. Someone sinned to produce this suffering, either this man, somehow in the womb, or his parents. The disciples ask Jesus directly, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus says, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." Sit with that. This man carried years of darkness, of dependence, of hearing the world without seeing it, for a reason that had nothing to do with fault. He was not being punished. He was not being abandoned. He was born into a story larger than his suffering. On this specific day, in this specific street, a sign was going to be given that required exactly this kind of darkness to set up. I am not offering you an easy theology of suffering right now. I know better than to try. What I am showing you is what the text actually says, and what the text says is that some conditions are not punishments, some silences are not verdicts, some waiting contains a purpose the person waiting cannot see from inside it. Jesus spits into the dirt, makes mud, and puts it on the man's eyes. There is something deliberately earthy about this. Dust and water, applied to eyes that have never opened to light. "Go," he says, "wash in the Pool of Siloam." In 2004, construction workers laying pipes in the city of David uncovered the Pool of Siloam. Archaeologists excavated a first-century stepped pool, exactly where John's text locates it. You can stand on those steps today. The man born blind walked down steps that archaeologists would find buried under centuries of soil 2,000 years later. He goes, he washes, he comes back seeing. When the Pharisees demand to know who healed him, he says, "A man called Jesus." When they ask where Jesus is, he says, "I do not know." He is standing before the religious authorities with functioning eyes, having no theological category for what happened to him, simply reporting the facts as he has them. And the Pharisees, who have their sight perfectly intact, cannot see what is right in front of them. Jesus finds him later and reveals himself. The man's response, recorded by John without commentary, is the same response the investigation has been producing in person after person. He worshipped him. This is the ark John is building, sign by sign. Not faith producing miracles, miracles producing faith. Signs pointing toward the one who gave them, until the only reasonable response is to fall in the direction of worship. Here is what most people miss when they read about the feeding of the 5,000. This is the only miracle of Jesus recorded in all 4 Gospels besides the resurrection. Matthew has it, Mark has it, Luke has it, John has it. 4 independent authors, 4 different audiences, 4 different theological emphases, all recording the same event. That level of convergence is the kind historians have recognized as a marker of something that actually happened, and that everyone who knew about it refused to leave out. John tells you why the crowd was there. They were following Jesus because they had seen the signs he was doing on the sick, not because they had passed a doctrinal exam, because they had seen things that made it impossible to walk away without finding out more. 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, 5,000 men plus women and children on a hillside. Jesus takes what is offered, gives thanks, distributes it, and there is not merely enough, there is surplus. 12 baskets of fragments collected after everyone has eaten and stopped. 12 baskets, not 11, not 13, 12, the number of the tribes of Israel. The one who fed a nation in the wilderness for 40 years is standing on a hillside in Galilee, and he is feeding them again. The signs are not random. They are a vocabulary, and every word in that vocabulary points in the same direction. The crowd's response is immediate. This is the prophet who is to come into the world. They try to force him into kingship, and Jesus withdraws alone to the mountain. The signs are not a political negotiation. They are a revelation, and the crowd keeps trying to read them as capability rather than identity, what he can do for them rather than who he is. That same night, the disciples are in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. The water is rough. It is dark. They have rowed about 3 or 4 miles when they see Jesus walking toward them on the surface of the water, and they are frightened. Jesus says across the dark water, "Ego eimi," it is I. Do not be afraid. The original language is not accidental. Ego eimi, I am. The divine name from Exodus chapter 3, when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush and says, "I am who I am." Jesus is not saying, "I am the one you were looking for." He is using the name of God for himself, spoken over open water to ordinary fishermen in a boat. Matthew records that those in the boat worshipped him and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." A whisper would have been enough to calm the water. The words were not for the storm. They were for the men in the boat who needed to know, once and for all, who was stepping toward them across the dark. This is what every sign has been building toward. Not a credentials check, not a requirements list. A revelation offered to frighten people who did not ask for it, and a question embedded in the revelation that every sign has been asking in a different register. Given what you have seen, who do you say this man is? Stay with me for a moment outside the text. In the summer of 1967, a 17-year-old girl named Joni Eareckson dove into the Chesapeake Bay and struck a submerged rock. She was left paralyzed from the shoulders down. She was a Christian. Prayers were offered for her healing. Her own prayers, the prayers of people who loved her, and the physical healing she was asking for never came. She has spoken about those years with an honesty that I think the man at Bethesda would recognize. She did not know, in the early years of her injury, whether her unanswered prayer was a verdict on her faith. She had read the same gospel accounts you are reading right now. She had seen the same people in the text receive what she was asking for, and the math seemed to work against her. What she arrived at eventually, and she is careful to say the path took years, not weeks, is something close to what John's gospel has been building toward, sign by sign. The signs were not a reward system. They were a revelation of who Jesus was, and that revelation, she came to understand, did not require her to receive the specific healing she was asking for. It required her to encounter the one that every healing had been pointing toward. She is in her mid-70s now. She is still in that wheelchair, and she has spent more than 50 years telling the world about the resurrection of Jesus Christ as though she witnessed it personally. Not because she received what she asked for, but because she encountered the one who proved himself capable of what stood behind every healing. And that, she says, turned out to be enough. This is the bridge I want you to walk across, between what happened at the Pool of Bethesda 2,000 years ago and the unanswered thing you have been carrying into this investigation tonight. Bethany, 3 miles outside Jerusalem, a house where Jesus is loved. Jesus receives word that his friend Lazarus is ill, and John records something that you have to read twice to believe. When Jesus hears this, he stays where he is for 2 more days. Not from indifference, the text makes clear that Jesus loved this family. He delays because the sign that is about to be given requires a setup that a healing cannot provide. It requires a death. When Jesus finally arrives in Bethany, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. Martha comes out to meet him on the road before he even reaches the house, and she says the most human sentence in the Gospel of John. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha is not wrong to say this. She is not failing a faith test. She is saying out loud what every person in grief says silently into whatever silence they believe might be listening. If you had been here, if you had answered, if you had come when I called, the thing I am now living through would not exist. If you have ever prayed that prayer, not in those words, but in that shape, in the architecture of that request, then Martha's voice on that road is your voice. And what Jesus says to her is what he is saying to you. He does not explain the delay. He looks at the woman who is grieving and says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Ego eimi, I am. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." Martha says, "Yes, Lord, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God." And then he walks to the tomb, physically. Mary comes and the mourners with her, and they are all weeping. And then John gives you 2 words that are the shortest verse in the Bible and one of the most important things ever recorded about the nature of God. Jesus wept. This is not sentiment. This is one of the most significant moments in the Gospels. The man who already knows what he is about to do, who delayed specifically so that this moment would be possible, stops and weeps at the grave of his friend. The one who has authority over death does not bypass grief. He does not say, "Do not cry, watch what happens next." He enters the grief. He stands inside it. He weeps in the middle of it. Before he does anything else, he lets the full weight of what death costs fall on him. Take that with you. Come back to it at 2 in the morning when the silence is loudest. They reach the tomb. A stone is covering the entrance. Martha says, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." There is the stone again, the stone from the water jars in Cana, the stone that every sign in John's Gospel has been quietly building toward. "Roll it away," Jesus says. He stands at the open entrance and prays out loud, not for himself, but so the crowd standing behind him will understand what is about to happen and why. And then he speaks in a loud voice into the darkness of the tomb. "Lazarus, come out." A whisper would have been enough. The loud voice was not for Lazarus. It was for everyone standing outside that tomb who needed to hear exactly what was happening and who was doing it. And a man who has been dead for 4 days comes out of the grave, still wrapped in burial cloths, still wearing the face cloth around his head, moving toward the light in the careful, deliberate way of someone whose body is remembering what it was made to do, shuffling through the darkness toward the voice that called him by name. "Unbind him," Jesus says, "and let him go." This is the 7th sign in John's Gospel, but it is not the last sign, because John is building toward one more, the sign that all 7 have been pointing to, the one that the entire case was constructed to make possible for you to believe, the 8th sign, the one that changes the weight of every sign that came before it. A few weeks later, in a garden not far from Jerusalem, another stone will be moved from another entrance of another tomb. and the one who comes out will not need to be unbound. And Mary of Magdala will be the first person to see him standing in the garden in the early morning, and she will mistake him for the gardener until he says her name. The resurrection of Jesus is the final sign, the sign John built his entire gospel to make the case for, the one that answers not just what happened in the garden on Sunday morning, but what every healing was proving, what every sign was saying, what every stone and pool and blind man and dead man and plate of bread and cup of wine was pointing toward. And here is the last piece of evidence I want you to see before we close this investigation. At the moment of Jesus' death on the cross, one word falls from his lips, telestai. It is finished. Some scholars of ancient Greek, drawing on commercial papyri from Egypt, a tradition going back to early 20th century research, have read this word as it appeared on receipts marking a completed transaction, a paid debt. The interpretation carries debate among scholars, but what the word itself means in Greek is beyond debate, a completed action whose results stand permanently and cannot be undone. The perfect tense in Greek does not simply say this is over. It says this has been accomplished once and for all, and nothing that comes after can undo what has been done here. And now go back to the beginning. Go back to Cana. The wine ran out. Something was incomplete, unfinished, insufficient. Jesus filled the stone jars, and the celebration continued, more abundantly than before. From the first sign of something lacking to the word telestai spoken at the cross, completing the thing that all of human history had left unfinished. From stone jars in Cana to a stone rolled away in a garden outside Jerusalem. The case begins and ends at stone, and everything in between is John telling you what the stone means. And now I want to talk to you directly, not to everyone watching, to the one who came to this video the way a person comes to the Gospels at 2 in the morning, after the scan came back wrong, after the prayer went unanswered for the 5th year in a row, lying in the dark, running the math on what is wrong with their faith. You have read these accounts before. You have looked at the man at Bethesda and wondered why he got what you are still waiting for. You have read about Lazarus coming out of the tomb and thought about your own sealed door. You have heard about the man born blind seeing for the first time and held that against the darkness you are still living in. And you have done what the text almost invites you to do. You have built a case against yourself, looking for what you did wrong, what you believed insufficiently, what level of faith you failed to reach. Here is what the evidence actually shows. Not what is easy to say, not what fits neatly on a wall print, not what the comparison between your unanswered prayer and the healed people in these accounts seems to suggest, but what John's gospel demonstrates, case by case, sign by sign, from the stone jars in Cana to the empty tomb in the garden. The man at the pool did not know Jesus' name. He had no faith to offer. He filed a logistical complaint when asked if he wanted to be healed, and he walked away carrying his mat. The man born blind did not ask to be healed. He did not seek Jesus out. Jesus sought him. The sign was given not because of what the man brought, but because on that specific day, in that specific street, God had chosen to display his work. Lazarus was dead. He had no say in the matter, and Jesus called his name in a loud voice from outside the tomb and waited to see who would come shuffling into the light. The sign was never a reward for sufficient believing. The sign was a revelation designed to produce belief in people who did not have enough of it before they encountered it. And the revelation has already happened. The case is already closed. The tomb is already empty. You are not being asked to believe harder so that God will finally act. You are being shown what God has already done. In a garden, on a Sunday morning, when a stone was moved and burial cloths were left behind, and you are being invited to look at the evidence and let it do what evidence is supposed to do. Produce a verdict. Not a verdict on your faith, a verdict on who Jesus is. So look at the evidence, not at your prayer history, not at your faith score, not at the distance between the people who got healed in the text and the silence you are sitting inside tonight. Look at 6 stone water jars in Cana, full of wine that was water a moment ago. Look at a man who had been waiting 38 years, getting up from the ground and carrying his mat home through the streets of Jerusalem. Look at a man born blind, standing at the bottom of steps he will never see again, mud washing from his face, light flooding in for the first time in his life. Look at a man walking out of a tomb, still wrapped in his burial cloths, moving toward the voice that called him by name. And then look at an empty tomb on a Sunday morning, and ask yourself what you believe about the one who did these things. Because here is what the evidence actually shows. Faith was always supposed to be what you felt after you saw who he is, not what you manufactured before he showed up. The word John used was not miracle, it was sign, and the sign was never about you. It was always pointing somewhere larger than your suffering, somewhere past the silence, somewhere beyond the night when the news came back wrong and you lay awake wondering what was wrong with your faith. It was pointing to a man standing outside a sealed tomb, calling a name in a loud voice, waiting to see who comes out. He is still calling names, and your name is on his list.